Frankfurt, 1744. There is a street in this city that is locked at night. Not locked because the people who live on it want to lock it, locked because the city requires it. The Judengasse, the Jew Lane, is a single, narrow road barely 4 meters wide, and it's where the entire Jewish population of Frankfurt is legally required to live. You cannot leave after dark, you cannot own property outside these walls, you cannot work in most professions, you pay a special tax just to walk through the city gates. By law, and honestly by custom, you are treated as something less than the other people in the city. And into this street, in this year, in this specific, locked, controlled, and suffocating place, a boy is born. His name is Meyer Amschel-Bauer. He's brilliant, he's poor, and he has almost zero options. But here is what the street gave him, right alongside everything it took away. A community of people who had learned across centuries of surviving incredibly hostile environments exactly how to trust each other across massive distances, how to move information quickly, how to build networks that literally couldn't be seen from the outside. Skills that the people who locked that gate at night, they never needed them because they never had to survive the way the people inside did. Meyer Amschel is going to take everything the street taught him and build from it the most powerful private banking institution in the history of the world. And then someone is going to take his family's name and use it to justify killing people for 200 years. This is both stories, and you absolutely need to hear both of them.
Okay, let's dive into this. Because to really understand this family, you have to understand the physical reality of the Judengasse. We're talking 300 meters long, barely 4 meters wide, 3,000 people living in severe, legally enforced overcrowding. This wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a containment zone. Now, Meyer inherited his father's coin-dealing business right here. His dad operated out of a house marked with a red shield, Rothschild in German. And yeah, that eventually became the family name. Meyer cultivated a relationship with Wilhelm IX, one of the wealthiest rulers in Europe, by offering unmatched expertise in rare coins and, absolutely crucial here, ironclad discretion. This right here was the foundation.
He took the exact survival mechanics of the ghetto and built an empire out of them. Think about it. When you have no legal protection, you learn to assess risk perfectly. You learn multiple languages just to deal with outsiders. You rely heavily on invisible networks. But the thing that made the Rothschilds truly unstoppable, the specific innovation that put them decades ahead of literally every other institution in Europe, had absolutely nothing to do with money. It had to do with information. What they knew, and exactly when they knew it, is the most misunderstood and, frankly, the most misrepresented part of their entire history. So Meyer had 5 sons, and as they came of age, he strategically deployed them across the continent. Amschel stayed put in Frankfurt, Solomon headed to Vienna, Nathan took on London, which turned out to be massive, Karl went to Naples, and James anchored the whole operation in Paris. Together, they built an unprecedented continental network. 5 major financial centers, all operating under a single unified strategy, bound entirely by family loyalty. I mean, no government anywhere possessed anything even remotely like this. Now, what's really interesting about the slide is exactly how that network communicated. While European governments were stuck relying on official postal routes that took weeks, were highly insecure, and were just constantly being intercepted, the Rothschilds built their own private courier system. They used their own riders, they used coded correspondence, they literally used carrier pigeons. This meant they consistently possessed critical political and military news days before the actual leaders of the countries they lived in. Which brings us straight to Waterloo, June 18, 1815. Nathan Rothschild in London receives confirmation of Napoleon's defeat before the British government does. So he goes to the stock exchange, he buys bonds, he makes a substantial profit, right? That is the documented reality. But decades later, pamphleteers invented a completely different story. They claimed Nathan deliberately sold bonds to trigger a massive panic, faking a French victory, before buying everything back at rock-bottom prices. Let me be clear, there is zero contemporary evidence for this. None. It was completely manufactured. And then, in the 1840s, someone decided to tell a very different story about this family. Not because the real story wasn't interesting enough, but because a lie about this family was suddenly much more useful to them than the truth. I'm going to show you exactly who built that lie, exactly how they built it, and exactly what it was designed to do. Because that lie, it is still running. Right now. Today. So how exactly do you manufacture a monster? We are no longer talking about financial history here. We are now dissecting the clinical, deliberate construction of a 2-century-old anti-Semitic disinformation campaign. The people who built this lie desperately needed a villain. And the Rothschilds? They were highly visible, highly successful,
and Jewish. They were the absolute perfect target. It all started in France in the 1840s. Socialist and nationalist writers needed a symbol of the financial capitalism they completely despised. That's where the Waterloo Lie was born. It established this foundational claim. If they profit from wars, well, they must start the wars. Then jump to 1902. The Russian secret police, the Okhrana, forged a document called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It took that Rothschild myth and massively expanded it to claim all Jewish people were engaged in this huge plot for world domination. Now, the Times of London actually exposed it as a total forgery in 1921. But honestly, it didn't matter. Henry Ford went ahead and printed millions of copies in America. Hitler cited it in Mein Kampf.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact manual for building a conspiracy theory. First, you take real success, like five brothers building a successful banking network, and you attribute it to malevolent coordination. Then you claim they secretly control the world. You make the scope so unbelievably massive that any contradictory evidence is just dismissed as, oh, well, that's just proof of their clever concealment. You attach it to centuries of existing prejudice, and finally you repeat it until it just runs on its own. The people who built this lie describe the Rothschilds as the hidden controllers of the world, the most powerful family in history, completely untouchable. And then 1938 arrived, and what happened to this supposedly all-powerful family is the most complete answer to the mythology that exists, and honestly, the most painful thing in this entire explainer.
Real quick, if this explainer is the first one you've watched from this arc, go back to day 56. The arc starts with the Freemasons and builds directly to exactly this point. What you'll understand about today's explainer after watching the full sequence is significantly different from what you'd understand having only seen this one piece. So subscribe. The Secret Society's arc has one more part, and then this channel moves into territory that is, if anything, even stranger. Stay close. 1938, the real cost. The storytelling up to this point has really been about the mechanics of the lie. But conspiracy theories are not just intellectual puzzles, guys. They are operational. They produce real-world behavior. And that behavior has a very real cost. In March 1938, Germany annexed Austria. Within days, the Gestapo was literally at the door of the Viennese Rothschild house. They arrested Baroness Louis de Rothschild. She was held by the Gestapo for over a year. And she was released only after the family agreed to transfer all of their Austrian banking operations and their personal assets to the Nazi state, at gunpoint. Think about that for a second. The supposedly all-powerful family, the hidden rulers of the world, could not even protect their own members from a regime that actually built its power using the mythology of their control. And it gets worse. The Château de la Muette in Paris was this beautiful Rothschild family home. It was a place of European diplomacy. But when France fell in 1940, the Nazi occupation requisitioned it. And they didn't just take it. They completely converted this family home into a brutal transit camp. 22,000. Between 1942 and 1944, 22,000 Parisian Jews were processed through the former Rothschild home. They were sorted, they were counted, and they were deported directly to Auschwitz. The mythology's answer to this is silence. There is no version of the conspiracy theory that explains how the untouchable puppet masters of the globe had their own family members held hostage, their assets seized, and their homes turned into waiting rooms for death camps. The mythology simply cannot survive direct contact with the Holocaust. But the lie? It didn't die in 1945. It didn't die when the war ended and the camps were liberated and the full horrifying scale of what it had helped justify was visible to the world. No, it went underground. And then, 50 years later, it came back, in a totally different form, on a different platform, with a very different name attached to it. And if you have ever seen that name, I think you already know which name I mean. You see, the explicit anti-Semitic framing of the 19th century Rothschild myth became completely socially unacceptable after the war. But the structure of the lie, that survived. It just needed a new carrier. Enter George Soros, a Jewish financier born in Hungary who was actually a child survivor of the Holocaust. The specific claims made about him today, secret control of governments, funding destabilization, manipulating elections, they are structurally identical to the claims made against the Rothschilds back in the 1840s. The conspiracy essentially functions as a technology. When the original target becomes too obviously persecuted, you just change the name. You keep the exact same structure. So the crucial point is this question right here. Who benefits from me believing this? The person who benefits from a conspiracy theory is literally never the person the theory describes as all-powerful. The target always pays the price. The person who really benefits is the person spreading the lie. The French pamphleteers, the Russian secret police, the Nazi propagandists, the modern political operative. They build the myth to protect their own power or to take power by handing you a convenient scapegoat. That is exactly what you should take away from this. That is how you navigate a world full of shadows.
Mayor Amschel Rothschild died in 1812 in the Judengasse, the street where he had been born 68 years earlier. By that time, 4 of his 5 sons had already left for their cities. The empire he had built from a locked street in a Frankfurt ghetto was already larger than anything he had imagined when he started. He died in the same house he had been born in. He is buried in the Jewish cemetery in Frankfurt. His grave has been a target of vandalism, his name has been used to justify horrors he never imagined, and crimes he would not have recognized as having any connection to anything he ever did. The mythology is not his fault. The mythology is the fault of the people who built it, and the people who spread it, and the people who acted on it. It is important to be clear about that. Tomorrow is day 60, the last explainer before the halfway point of the final phase. And we close the Secret Society's arc the way every great arc should close, not with a question, but with an answer. What is the one thing that all secret societies, all conspiracy myths, all hidden networks of power have in common? The answer is simpler than you think, and it tells you more about human nature than anything else in this arc. Day 60, the arc closer. See you there.